What's up, everybody? Some very exciting news to kick off the podcast. You can now go watch and listen on Spotify as well. Don't worry, it's not going to leave YouTube. It's always going to stay here. I just wanted to give people some more options to be able to watch and listen to the podcast. I will link it in the description below. Go give us a follow and a 5-star review. It helps out the podcast tremendously. So we're going to jump right back into it. A little bit of a recap from the last episode. October 17th, 2001. That's when I got the name New Scott. Lincoln Steen named me after Scott Savage because I got into the wrestling business the same way Scott did, driving everybody around, setting up the rings, stacking chairs, setting up chairs, just anything and everything that was needed before a show, at the show, and after the show. I was willing to do, and believe me when I tell you, I did everything. So that was October 17th, 2001 at Lincoln Steen's High School. 13 people showed up to this event. I believe there was a show the next day in Sheet Harbor. I don't remember much about that show, but we are going to talk about the first ever Team New Scott road trip, November 11th, 2001, Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, Whitney Pier, Ukraine Hall. I believe it was the Maritime Wrestling Alliance. It was the MWA. And oh my God, what a time that was. So me, Steen, and Scott, we head up to, this is November 11th, 2001. We head to Cape Breton in my 1990 Cavalier. This thing was before they started making fiberglass or plastic cars or whatever they're made of now. This thing was metal, and the doors weighed 1,000 pounds. It was crazy. The brakes hardly worked. There was absolutely no heat. The heat didn't work. And I remember asking Steen before this, because I didn't really know Steen all that well. It wasn't until this particular trip that we really bonded and became friends. I was like, well, my car's a piece of crap. There's the brakes don't really work. There's no heat, and there's a million other things wrong with the car. During this road trip, Lincoln Steen would look for something under the passenger seat, come out, and his hands would have like sweet and sour sauce and stuff. It was a mess of a car. But he was like, let's go. I'm willing to risk it if you are. And of course, I was all in. So we head to Cape Breton. It was freezing cold this November. And this was the first ever filmed New Scott road trip. This was the first ever New Scott road trip and the first ever filmed New Scott road trip. I have the entire thing. It's hours long. I've put various clips of it on the internet over the years. Most of it is not appropriate for YouTube. But man, some amazing memories from this road trip. Scott was in the back. Back then, I drove, like I still do now. I drove. Lincoln Steen was in the passenger seat. Scott Savage was in the back seat, working the camera, and that's what we did. We went to so many shows together like that, traveled all over the Maritimes just like that. It was such a fun time. It was crazy, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. The amount of miles and stuff that we did together back then was crazy, and it was a ton of fun. The trips to Sheet Harbor, this trip to Cape Breton, it was truly a really, really fun time. And I made two really close friends, Lincoln Steen and Scott Savage, to this day. I mean, Scott moved to New Zealand, got married, has a family, and I don't hear from him as much anymore. But if he showed up today, it'd be like nothing changed. It was like he wouldn't have been gone. We would catch up, hang out, and it would be incredible. It would be absolutely incredible. So we're going to Cape Breton, and we get there. I don't know any of these guys at this MWA show, but I've been explained a few things on the way up. I guess I don't know who they claimed trained them originally. I don't remember, but they weren't like certified trainers, or they weren't real trainers. They weren't people that put in any actual time in the wrestling business. It was just a bunch of people that had a ring and was like, let's figure out how to fall. And so it was the MWA. We get there. We get there like an hour or two before showtime. We get in there. We want to introduce ourselves. We get there. We walk inside. Of course, they know who Lincoln Steen and Scott Savage are. They have absolutely no idea who I am. Why would they? I was just the mark with the video camera at that point in time. Still am just the mark with the video camera. The mark just happens to do a whole bunch of other stuff. So we get there. We go inside and we're like, hey, is it okay if we come and check out the show? And they were like, no. We're like, what? They're like, you guys got to buy a ticket. We're like, and there's a rule in like wrestling business that if a wrestler or whatever shows up at a show, they don't necessarily have to pay to get in. They can hang out, take in the show, as long as they're not taking like seats away from fans or anything like that. They were like, we sell out, so you guys can't come in. And we were like, oh. And then someone else, I don't remember the names of any of these people, someone else was like, come downstairs and talk to so-and-so. So we walk downstairs, and the first thing we see is them practicing their chair shots in the locker room, full head to chair shots. Not like being like, oh, we're going to hit you like this, trying to figure it out. They were crushing each other in the locker room with these chair shots. And even then I was like, that can't be good. But of course, zip your mouth, say nothing, ears open, listen. Taught that from very early on. I should really use it more these days. But so we're talking to somebody, and I guess this is the guy that runs the show. And he was like, I have to go check with the board of directors. You may have seen me use that term online in posts when advertising shows to this day, and it's just a joking callback to that moment, because this backyard promotion in Cape Breton is like, we have a board of directors. I mean, good for them for having a board of directors, trying to keep things organized, I guess, but it was a little bit ridiculous. So they're like, we got to check with the board of directors, as they're hitting each other with steel chairs, and they come back and they tell us, we can stay. Oh, thank you. And I was like, I'll film, I'll send you the tape, no problem. They were like, you can stay, but you're not allowed to sit. We sell out all of these events. There will be no chairs available. You have to stand. We're like, that's fine. Standing room only. Again, before like podcasts and anything were a thing, I had a blog where I would write online, and I called it Standing Room Only. I would later call a show Standing Room Only, and it was because of this interaction. So much ridiculous stuff I've done came from this particular show. So we were like, Standing Room Only, absolutely no problem. Let's hang out, have fun. So the show starts, and of course, it was atrocious. But like, I didn't know anything at the time. But you could be like, these kids, no one had gear. When we got upstairs from having the meeting with the board of directors, they were tightening the ropes in the ring by doing a handstand on the bottom rope to figure out if it's tight. I've never once seen anybody do that ever again. The bottom rope on a wrestling ring is basically there for looks. It doesn't really do much in terms of effectiveness. Of course, you want it tight, but they were tightening it and seeing how tight it was by doing a handstand on the bottom rope. I don't get it. Maybe it's a thing. I don't know, but I've never seen it done anywhere ever again. So we go upstairs, we wait for the show to start. A few people know who Steen and Scott are. They come over, and this was the first time we ever met the queen of Maritime Wrestling, Kathy Yetman, in person. I don't joke when I tell you how instrumental Kathy Yetman was to Maritime Wrestling back then, to me being able to do stuff on the internet. Just like, I'm positive Maritime Wrestling on the internet wouldn't be a thing if it wasn't for Kathy Yetman. I'm sure it would be today, but it wouldn't be a thing back then. It wouldn't have been a thing for years if it wasn't for Kathy Yetman helping me out as much as she did. It was absolutely crucial, and I will never be able to thank her enough. I am indebted to her forever. She may be coming home this summer, so maybe we'll get Kathy she lives out west now. Maybe we'll get Kathy to talk about a few things on the podcast if indeed she does end up coming home. So we go upstairs, we stand against the back wall, we start watching the show, and it's really bad. It's really bad. Steen goes to sit down at one point in time, and Scott, dead serious, goes up. He's like, "You can't sit down. We'll get in trouble. We'll get kicked out." Takes the seat from Steen and makes Steen stand back up again. Standing room only. The board of directors are going to yell at us. We're going to get in trouble. Oh man. It was absolutely so funny. You don't even understand. There's probably still a lot of backyard wrestling around. You just don't see it as much, but just picture your friends in a ring charging people. You're in sneakers, jeans, jogging pants, shorts, a t-shirt, a tank top, zero gear. Nobody has any idea what they're doing. Nobody has any idea. Not that anybody really, not that the people I knew was like, this is how you put a match together perfectly back then. Everybody was still learning. But these guys shouldn't have been learning the way they were doing it because there was nobody professional enough teaching them. They were just kids going out there charging people and doing a thing. And it absolutely 100% did not sell out. There was probably, I don't know, I have this on film. All of this stuff I'm saying, I can prove. I have everything on film. So there might have been 30, 35 people there, 40 being generous. And I said at the end of the last video, I would say who was trained, who was not trained. And boy, did that get a reaction, because I think they thought I was talking about current gen Maritime Wrestling. And I will get into that in a different episode. But I meant on this particular show. And the answer was nobody. But Purity Saint was on that show, and a lot of fans today might not know who she is, but she ended up 5 years later, so that was 2001. In the spring of 2006, in the very second Wildman Wrestling Academy class, Purity Saint ended up getting properly trained and would go on to have a few matches and have a really fun, not long, but a really fun short career. She only wrestled after being trained for a couple of years, but it was fun. She was on a lot of shows that I did. I actually booked her on a show one time against a very young Wayne Jugs who wrestled as Chris Madison, and they crushed it. But Purity Saint would later go on to get properly trained by Wildman Gary Williams. There was a fella named The Dice that would go on to wrestle as Lumberjack Johnson, who was on that show. He would later go on to get trained by the Cardinal Sinners, Cowboy Mike Hughes, and Brody Steele. Duke McIsaac was there for a bit of it as well, I think, helping out with the training. I have some of that training on film as well. But Dice, Lumberjack Johnson, would later go on to get properly trained, and he would have, I don't know how long he actually wrestled for, but he had a decent career here locally in the Maritimes. He got to wrestle some names, changed his physique and gimmick entirely, and did well for himself. Worked a bunch with Ultimate Championship Wrestling. And in the crowd, this one's the funniest, because we didn't know who this was at the time. It was just a dude in the crowd. I wouldn't know until about 15 years later who this was, because he would point it out to me back when we used to hang out and talk fairly often. Covey Christ, Kaizen Pro Wrestling's Covey Christ. He runs the Kaizen Pro Wrestling School. I'm pretty sure that's what it's called. Maybe it's called Academy. I don't know. He has a wrestling school now in Dartmouth where he trains a bunch of the local Maritime wrestlers, but back then had no idea who he was. Just a kid in the crowd, Covey Christ. So years later, when he debuted with Wrestle Center, I've actually refereed Covey's very first professional wrestling match. I believe it was 2016, might have been 2015, but it was 15 or 16, right around there. He wrestled a guy named Rodney, I believe. The match was only a couple minutes long, but I was the referee for Covey Christ's first ever professional wrestling match. He went on and continues to go on and wrestles. He wrestles for Kaizen. Just in case people out there don't know who I'm talking about, I'm hoping to bring in a new audience, and of course, all of these people are going to have no idea who I'm talking about whatsoever. So Covey wrestles in Dartmouth for Kaizen, has a training school, continues to have a good career here in the Maritimes. But back then, like I said, just a dude in the crowd, and it was really funny when I talked to Covey about this particular show, and he was like, show me the footage. So I show him the footage, and he like circles himself where he is in the crowd. He's like, that's me. I'm like, that's hilarious. I interviewed Covey one time as well, if you want to check that out and learn more of who he is. But yeah, so this show, Purity Saint, The Dice, Covey Christ would later to go on and get trained by Scott D'Amore. It was probably the Border City Wrestling School. I'm pretty sure that's what it was called at the time. It might still be called that now. I don't know. But that's where Covey would end up going trained. He didn't get trained here locally. He moved away, got trained, did whatever he did, and then came back about 15 years later and started wrestling. So after that show, that show opened my eyes to a lot. Even at that point of like, things that shouldn't be happening in wrestling. Like, it's not like the mainstream wrestling shows I was going to was stacked full of talent, because they weren't. It was better, but it was similar to the MWA stuff. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, it was just a bunch of really young people that probably shouldn't have been in a wrestling ring at that time. They should have probably had some more training, but they were just making do with what they had, trying to, make it a career themselves. And some of them, even though they weren't trained, were decent. But you should still always get properly trained. So after that show, we drive home, and that drive home, the entire 4 hours or whatever it is on film, and it's hilarious. A lot of the things that I joke about and from time to time in posts, it comes from things that were said during that initial road trip. It was just hilarious, but that was the trip that really started the bond between myself, Steen, and Scott. Like I said earlier, we would go to a lot of shows together, and the next show we would go to together, would be, I don't remember where this was, but it was another high school. I don't believe it was the same high school, but there was a couple of guys brought in from out west, Rob Stardom and Chad Tatum. I remember becoming an instant fan of Chad Tatum after this show. I don't know what he ended up doing, but I believe he was from Winnipeg. Man, that kid had so much talent back then. Like I said, I don't know where he ended up. I don't know if how long he continued to wrestle for, or even if he continues to wrestle to this day. He might. I should look that up. He was incredible. He had a match with Scott Savage that night that was just bonkers for November 2001. For the limited experience that these two guys had, they went out there and tore it up. Lincoln Steen wrestled a fellow named Rob Stardom, who was also from Winnipeg, I believe. Again, I don't know what he was up to, but I believe they had more experience than Scott and Steen, or had a few more matches anyway. So it was good for me to see these new guys coming in being like, oh, there's wrestling out west as well. Interesting. It became that's when things started to become an obsession with me. I got to find out everything I need to do about Maritime Wrestling. I got to find out everything I need to know about Canadian wrestling. Could have cared less about anything in the States. I just wanted to learn as much about Canadian and Maritime Wrestling in specific as possible. But in doing that, I made friends out west. I made friends in Ontario, Quebec, everywhere. So I got to learn a lot about the scenes in their area. So Chad Tatum, Rob Stardom came down. They just did that one show. Then there was a show the next day in Sheet Harbor, a ladder match. Lincoln Steen versus Jeremiah the Delinquent Scott Savage for the mainstream wrestling championship. Lincoln Steen was going into this match as champion. And, oh my God, for a ladder match with two guys with limited experience, so much fun. They definitely did not hold back. They were going over the match on the way up. They watched the match on the way back, and they were so proud of that match at that particular time. I don't know if they went back and watched it, if they feel the same. Probably not. But at that point in time, it was so cool hearing these guys be so proud of this 17-minute ladder match that they put on in the Lions Den? Lions Club? I don't remember what it was called. Beautiful building in Sheet Harbor. The ladder match was unreal. I actually stayed the night at the promoter's house. The promoter, of course, was Devin Chittick. Stayed in, I don't know if it was his bedroom or a spare bedroom, but whatever it was still filled with, if you know Devin, you know that he's a giant Bret Hart fan, and this bedroom was filled with Bret Hart merchandise. The next morning, his parents woke up, I woke up, we all woke up, and they made Devin make me breakfast. He made me waffles, delicious. And then we had the show that day. It was just me, him, and another guy who I don't even remember who this guy is whatsoever. We set up all the chairs. We set up the ring together. And it took us forever. Now, setting up a ring, 25 minutes. Half hour tops. But it seemed to take us like 7 hours to set this ring up. I had no idea what I was doing. Maybe Devin had no idea what he's doing. Setting up this ring together at this point in time, he wouldn't have done it a ton, obviously. But we did everything. We set the ring up. We tore it down. And the show itself, like, it wasn't great, but it was a lot of fun. So that's where I'm going to end this particular episode. Just going home. These guys being proud of their ladder match, it honestly was really cool to see. Now, the next episode, we get into some juicy talk. It was all the rage in 2001. It was mainstream wrestling, The Fight Before Christmas, I think it was called. But that's what everyone calls wrestling shows at Christmas time. Something similar. Seasons Beatings, The Fight Before Christmas, something very similar. But on this show, the queen of Maritime Wrestling, Kathy Yetman, attended, and boy did things go downhill quickly. I know you want to hear about it. Make sure to like, subscribe, follow on Spotify. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back soon with the next episode.